Hello and welcome back to the Brit Iron podcast. Today is episode 24 in our season preview series, and we are into the top 10 of our rankings with the number 9 seed today, the Tennessee Titans, who we've got pitted out at 10 and 6. And today, of course, joined by Matt and Sam. Now, the first point I'd like to raise is around the quarterback situation. And do we think that Ryan Tannehill is the guy going forward? Now, this is a guy that has just signed a fresh contract worth $118 million over 4 years. Makes him the 7th highest paid quarterback in the league, the highest paid Titan, and the 14th highest paid NFL player altogether. So, what do we make of this? And yeah, like I say, is he the right guy to go forward with this team?
I'll let Sam kick it off and have a roast him and
brutalise
the man.
It's when you rattle off those numbers and you say he's the 7th highest paid quarterback in the league. Now, he, for me, is getting paid the kind of money that you then expect your quarterback to be the kind of player who can win without incredible talent around him. He needs to elevate the team around him, which I don't think Tannehill does. Tannehill had a good year last year, a very good year, a career year. Across the board, his statistics were much higher across every statistic than his career average. His career quarterback record, wins to losses, is 49-49. He's a 500 quarterback. In my opinion, you don't pay a 500 quarterback the 7th highest salary of all quarterbacks in the league. You look at last year, he had a 70.3% completion percentage, which is brilliant. It's unreal. His career average is 63.5%. Now, even if he stays much better than his career average, it's not going to be at 70% again. It's very unlikely to be at 70%. His touchdown percentage, now this is really big for a lot of quarterbacks. When you see a lot of quarterbacks come out and have massive career years, and they post touchdown percentages which are north of 7%, that doesn't happen. That is incredibly rare, and even the best quarterbacks throughout history don't put back-to-back seasons of more than 7.5% touchdown conversion percentage. Last year, Tannehill was at 7.7%. His career average is 4.5. Now, lots of the best quarterbacks on their good years go north of 7.5, but their career average normally sits around 5, 6. To be below 5, I would say, is more of a average to lower end starter in the league. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think he's a bad quarterback. I just don't think he's worth the money that Tennessee paid him. When you consider all of the other... they've just doled out a big contract to Derrick Henry. I think this contract could hurt them more than I would expect that Tannehill is capable of lifting them up. I don't think he's good enough when they can't afford to pay any other players they need to pay. They already lost Jack Conklin this offseason, who was key on that offensive line. I don't think that he's good enough to take this team regardless of those pieces missing, and they've basically paid him off of a 10-game sample in which he played well above his career averages. Every player will have one great year in the league. Or every player who is a solid player, they'll have 1 year that is much better than everything else they do. Lots of people do it in all of the things you do. Sometimes you show up, like maybe you're playing golf and you just have one round that is suddenly you shoot 10 shots better than you would average.
Still waiting
shoot.
to see that from you.
I was going to say that.
But my point is, if I show up and I shoot an 80 playing golf, that doesn't make me an 8 handicap player. It just means that I did it one time. And I struggle to see how this deal makes sense, in my opinion.
I think, yeah, the deal is inflated. I think it does put some pressure on him. I'm not going to sit here and try and justify the deal. What I'm more looking at is Tannehill almost as big, and it is off a small sample size, what could be a perfect system guy to do everything that they need of him. I think for this season, one big point is we've already seen A.J. Brown start to look good as a number one. And like he can be a guy that can be an absolute handful. And I think he continues that trajectory. You've got Adam Humphries, who's quietly a good slot guy. He's not ever going to be incredible. He's not ever going to really be a big name. And maybe another guy, they might be overpaying a little bit. But he's a good guy that he can rely on if he just needs to get the ball to him. He's going to have Jonu Smith this year, who I think is almost one of the biggest breakout candidates. Who is, I think he's replacing Delaney Walker, who's been almost a bookend of that Titans team. And I think Jonu Smith is going to come in, he knows the system, and he is going to be brilliant this season. And here's the thing, they don't even need that to be the part of the offense that carries them. Because I think Derrick Henry, yes, he had an incredible year, and I think there could be regression for both of them off of statistically how they played. But I think what they've got here, and looking at the stats from sort of when Tannehill came in, week 7 last year, before that they were 4-2, and overnight just Tannehill coming in for Mariota in terms of a completely different style of quarterback, but as I said, maybe more of a system guy, changed them over to a team that only lost another 3 times on the rest of the season and won 7, and one of those games against the Texans was a 3-point game. I think for me this is a team that is going to build on what I did last year, and I am looking at them as one of my dark horse teams for this year.
You see, I think that's where we differ. I think this team tends towards the Tennessee average, which is 8-8. And I think when you look at what Mariota did there in his tenure, his 5 years in Tennessee, his career averages across the board are almost identical to Tannehill. Mariota's been shipped out of town. They've given Tannehill a massive deal. And you look at his career completion percentage for Mariota, 62.9. Tannehill's is 63.5. So ever so slightly better. Touchdown percentage, 4.3 for Mariota, 4.5 for Tannehill. Ever so slightly. Interception percentage, both at 2.5%. Their numbers across the board are very similar, like almost identical. You'd struggle to, if you put them name to name, you wouldn't necessarily know the difference. So when you're taking these averages of these two players, it's not like we don't have a good sample size on both of them. They might have slightly different styles of play, but career averages over large sample sizes for both of them basically have them both at 500 quarterbacks.
But that's at very different teams. I don't think you can compare. I think Tannehill's had it easier. Not Tannehill, Mariota's had it easier than Tannehill. Tannehill being on that Dolphins team, which at points, it had a couple while he was there, points where it looked a bit better, but there's also been some points where it's looked downright horrible. So I personally think Mariota had it a lot easier, and if you swap them over, I think Tannehill is ahead of him. I personally think, and as well, it's as much as there's similar averages, I say for Tannehill, it's just a pure system guy. The way he plays, I think it might be on those weird occasions where it lines up with a coaching staff's vision and with a playbook and everything, and it just meshes, where it means a guy plays a bit over his head. Mm. And I personally think that, yes, there is going to be some regression. I'm not saying he's going to come out and have a 7% touchdown percentage where it was forever and a 70% completion record for the whole time he's there. I think it will obviously come down a bit, but I think he makes them a hell of a lot of a better team, and I think the combination tips them more over the edge of being an 8-8 Tennessee team.
Yeah, I think that's probably just where we differ, in the sense that I agree that they're on the right day. I think they're a team that can beat anyone. They showed it last year in the playoffs. But I think over a full season, you're going to see them tend towards their average. And I think they probably will make the playoffs. And then once you're in the playoffs, anything can happen. But I think with this team, there are a number of stats from last season that basically suggest that they were sort of pretenders. Yes, they made it to the championship game, and it was great. And it was kind of this fairy tale run. But were they better than Baltimore, or were they better than Baltimore on that one day? And it's kind of that argument of, yes, they did it last year, and they did it, and everyone was like, whoa, what's happened here? No one expected this to happen. Can they do it again this year? I think unlikely. I think they're a team that had a fairy tale run, and if it had lined up for another game and they'd have somehow beat the Chiefs and kept that running game going, then yes, they could have gone on and won a Super Bowl, but it's not unusual that you see a team come out and they have a fairy tale run and they do really well one year, and then the next year they come back and they tend back to their norm, which is around a 500 team. There's a couple of things I would like to see this team, especially on third down. Their third down conversions last year was appalling. I'm talking like 40%. If they want to really compete this year, that has to be up over 50%. The teams that do best in the NFL have third down conversions over 60%. So to be under 50%, that to me suggests that you're getting lucky at the right time rather than being consistently good. And I'm not saying they can't do it because they've shown that they can. I just question whether they've got the pieces there to do it consistently.
That's fair. I think there's the difference of as well. Every now and then you get a team that does come out, Cinderella story, play over their heads. But then also you have to have times where teams do that and it's a breakout. And I personally think that's what this is instead. It's not a fluke. It's them taking the next step. Not saying they're going to be championship game every year, but it's a step out of the misery of 8-8, 8-8 kind of thing.
Yeah.
Of that just kind of, you're not having a dreadful season, but you're not really getting near anything. I think there's actually some belief behind it for me.
Yeah, and just for the record as well, because I think it's worth noting that Sam, you had him at 8-8, Matt, you had him at 12-4, and I had him at 11-5. So I'm definitely swaying more towards you on this one, Matt. However, Sam, you did mention the running game. I think, Matt, you mentioned it as well, to be honest with you. But I think it's definitely worth bringing up because a lot of people think running back and Derrick Henry when they think of this team. And, Derrick Henry just been paid a big deal. Another player that's on another big deal with the Titans. 4-year, $50 million deal. A player that's arguably, in my opinion, more deserving than Tannehill.
Yeah.
But do you guys think they maybe rely on that run game too much? One-dimensional, so to speak?
I wouldn't know if I say too much. I think because otherwise you're going to look at any team with an identity and almost look at it as they rely on X too much and almost as a negative. Instead of it's kind of looking at it as a glass half empty as opposed to more looking at it as they just do this well, or at least for last season did. I think, and then they obviously took a rookie this year, Darrington Evans, in the third, so just to kind of give him a bit behind Derrick Henry in case, because that was a concern before the draft of, if Derrick Henry went down, this is suddenly a running team that doesn't really have anything. Yeah. So, obviously it's a young, unproven guy, but they've got at least someone sat in that backfield who could give them a bit of something, so to take him in the third, that means they obviously had a bit of belief in him. But I don't see it as a negative at all. And I think especially someone like Derrick Henry, as much as he is physical, if there's a running back that I want in a team where I'm going to play a physical run game and a guy who's hopefully going to stay out there, it's probably going to be Derrick Henry because he is just a monster. Like, I think a lot of the times, if you're the guy hitting Derrick Henry, you're probably not going to want to throw everything into that because you think if you do, you're practically running full force into a brick wall that's also running at you very quickly. Like, I think it's almost like going into a moving truck. So I think that's why I quite like it, I think, in this particular instance.
It's really going to depend, for me, it's going to depend on how well they can fill that gap of Jack Conklin. Because they were even running to the opposite side to where Jack Conklin is on that offensive line last year. They were really productive. But my worry is that without Jack Conklin there, if you can't replace that kind of run game, like run blocking, if you can't get the same production on that side too, and it suddenly becomes that it's only one side of the line that you can consistently run down consistently, then it becomes much easier to scheme defenses against Derrick Henry because you just put your best run stoppers on that side of the line and you bottle him up. And the thing is, whether people want to say it or not, if Derrick Henry had been bottled up in the playoffs last year, which he didn't, he had a historic playoffs, but that team is nowhere near as good. I mean, I think Tannehill was the first quarterback in history to win 2 consecutive playoff games, both passing for less than 100 yards. Now, that's brilliant. That is brilliant on a game-to-game basis. My worry is that they rely too heavily on Derrick Henry. And that is one variable that if Derrick Henry goes down injured, they don't have someone to replace him. Like, nobody else in the league is Derrick Henry. Like, literally nobody else. Saquon isn't as good at what Derrick Henry does as what Derrick Henry does.
100%. Like, that's why they've paid him.
And they are built. They are completely built to take Derrick Henry and say, right, win us the game because we're just going to run the ball like mad and we've got a quarterback who's not going to throw loads of interceptions and he's going to manage the game and he's going to do his job, but your job is the important one. So I do worry that if defenses can just figure out over the season, right, this is how we bottle up Derrick Henry, then maybe that's that for the Titans and they roll back to being 8-8. And I think that's my biggest thing, is I don't dislike Tannehill. I don't think that he's like a bad quarterback, anything like that. I just think they're so focused on this run game. And it's not even like, oh, it's a run game where you can move players in and out. I think you could argue that Derrick Henry is probably the least replaceable running back in the league, because there is nobody else who can do what he does in the same way.
Up there with CMC, I think, in that kind of way of within his role. But I think the thing for me, if I'm the Titans, potentially almost got you right where I want you. I think there's a reason they haven't just paid Tannehill. If they really wanted to just do it off of a system guy, and they want to, they could have gone out. If they just wanted to just have a guy that doesn't throw picks, they could have got one without having to. They didn't need to pay Tannehill this much. They've got some players around him, some weapons that I think are going to really keep coming out this year. And I think there's actually going to be a bit more to see from them throwing the ball when they need to and catching teams off guard a little bit more with that. I think you don't pay Tannehill the money you have to not potentially develop his role, develop this offense a bit more. Yeah. And that's the one thing I think people need to keep an eye on, is that just because of how they played last year, they can tailor it, and they could almost use it as, we've seen how far we got doing that. Now, what were the weaknesses of this? What are the bits we could improve on? Focus there. And if they could bring that into this season, and in what's been a very weird off-season, but one that I think for coaches has been potentially one of the best, just in terms of being able to almost have a head down and within their own sort of environment, potentially get a little bit creative and kind of scheme some stuff up. And I don't know, I like the thought of this team, and I think they've got the talent there to do it, to diversify a bit more when they need to. Still lean on Derrick Henry, but every now and then just come out with something, and maybe at the start of a game catch you out and just say to Tannehill, right, try and light it up a little bit just for a quarter, and then go back to just being consistent. Because I think a lot of people are going to not expect it and not see that coming and just think Derrick Henry.
So sticking on the weapons front then, and dialing down into maybe the receiver side of things, and then shifting onto the fantasy. What value are you seeing then for this year for the wide receivers in fantasy football?
I really like Corey Davis.
Yeah.
That's really like Corey Davis this year.
Definitely. I think, but actually with him and AJ Brown, I think you've got Corey Davis is going to be going lower than potentially where he deserves to an extent, because a lot of people are thinking AJ Brown. I think AJ Brown maybe is going a little bit over, but for what I think AJ Brown can do this year, I would happily draft AJ Brown at his current ADP. I think either of these guys, I'm quite happy if I've got them in my team. Maybe more AJ Brown, because on a run-heavy team, if I'm taking a receiver, I want the wide receiver one. I want the top guy, but I think it doesn't mean Corey Davis doesn't have value as well. I think you can, with either two of those guys, you can feel relatively confident picking them and having them in your team.
Yeah. To be honest, I think for fantasy as well, looking at this roster, I'm actually looking at Jonnu Smith from the tight end room.
100%.
Just as like a big, he's the one that like we're not going to sit here and say like really there's nothing much to say about Derrick Henry. He's going to be going in the first round. He's going to be getting a shed ton of carries. Like he's locked and loaded. That as long as everyone stays healthy and everything's, he's going to get a lot of carries. So you're going to draft him early. The wide receivers, again, there's not that much to be said that's going to be groundbreaking that everybody listening to this, if you're into fantasy football, you don't already know. Jonnu Smith is just the one to me that I'm looking at that and think, yeah, he could be the guy that this time in a year, everyone is suddenly going, right, draft Jonnu Smith in that kind of top tier of tight ends. So he's the guy that I'm going to be going out and actively trying to get hold of off of this roster.
100%.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, for sure. Now, maybe Ryan Tannehill in the fantasy side of things we should speak about. Yeah, does he have much late round value at all? I know, Matt, you're saying maybe if they shift more towards using these offensive weapons, perhaps he
I
could
think
offer something there.
to see to an extent AJ Brown, Jonas Smith, these players properly kind of come out and not just be feasible, be good fantasy options. You're gonna need to see Tannehill obviously providing that for them. I think he's maybe more of he's going to be around a similar range, that around 10, 11, where that sort of the main block outside of the big name quarterbacks go, and he's maybe a bit more of your what you're getting. There's less of a potential Drew Lock upside, but also Drew Lock, if it doesn't go towards the upside, is a risk. And there's a few guys, I think when you're picking a quarterback around the 10th round, there's risks to all of them. And it's more, you've got some that are they could absolutely win you a season, but could also lose you a season. Whereas I think Tannehill could be a middle ground, where you can he's not going to necessarily win you weeks, but he also might not lose you weeks. He'll just sort of be a very middle ground guy. I've got him in our dynasty, and because I have Carson Wentz, and I think he's almost a reliable guy I can have as, for me, my backup, but knowing that if I had to, I can put him in and at least be comfortable having him in for me.
You see, I would be very, very shaky having Tannehill on my fantasy because I don't think I think it's going to be very rare that he wins you weeks because it's going to be very rare that he goes out. I'm not saying he can't do it, but it's going to be very rare that they're going to ask him to. Yeah, but I think where you say he's not going to lose you weeks, I say that he will lose you weeks. They're not because he's going to throw loads of interceptions, but because there might well be weeks where if Derrick Henry gets on a tear and runs for 200 yards, we've seen it in the playoffs last year. Tannehill is just a non-factor. He throws 8 passes all games for less than 100 yards and maybe no touchdowns, at which point you are getting little to no production from your quarterback whatsoever. So I would be wary because I just don't think there is a high enough upside when I've seen that his floor week to week is very low. Like, it's not like he consistently puts up 200 yards passing and a touchdown every single week. There will be weeks, because of the way this team's built and the way this team wants to win, that if they've got the game scripts where they're up 2 scores and stuff like that, they're just going to be handing the ball off, and every now and then there'll be a third down that Tannehill will get the chance to throw it, and they'll be happy to do that if they're winning games. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's 2 or 3 weeks this year where he just puts up an absolute dud, not because he's played badly, but because he just hasn't really had to do much, because Derrick Henry is that good.
Yeah. I think people read a little bit too much into the playoffs for me, and I think in terms of the regular season, he had, it was 1 week where he had 12 last season, but outside of that, from week 7 onwards, I think his lowest was around 18, if not mid-20s. He had a game in the 30s. So I think he's not as much. People look at that playoff run and think that's Tannehill, that's the floor, but in the regular season it wasn't to the same extent, which I think he is going lower than he deserves because people are just tunneling on the playoffs.
Yeah,
for me.
Yeah, I think he's more of a streaming option for me, if I'm honest. I wouldn't be looking to pick him up in the draft. I think I'm more on Sam towards the side of the run game being a lot more heavily an influence here. So that's why I think more of a streaming option for me. But a dependable streaming option, of course. That's why I would value him. However, unless there's any more points that you boys would like to raise on this team.
No, I'll shut up, otherwise I'll have all of Tennessee coming at me.
Deservedly so.
8-8 is an outrage, mate. That's all I'll say.
It's tending towards the average, mate.
You know what? We'll have to wait and see on that one. So.
Oh, we certainly will.
Mate, I can always find a way to get that phrasing. So I felt like a good time to do it. But unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in this episode. Be sure to go over to YouTube, check us out there. Go like, comment, and subscribe. Also, check us out on Twitter and Instagram. We're at the Brit Iron, and we are setting up a listen league. If you did not know by now, we got a few posts up on those social media accounts, as I just mentioned, explaining how you can be in the chance of being involved with the league, of which the draw is happening in about a week's time. End of July, we're looking to do that draw. So, go over there, register your interest, and get involved. But for now, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.